Thank you for listening to Your Content Connection. In the first part of our series, Alistair, Rob, and Jeff discussed how organizations are modernizing their information management ecosystems by migrating to the cloud. They also discussed common myths and outdated perceptions about secure, compliant information management in Microsoft 365, SharePoint Online, and Teams. Now we're going deeper with Jeff, Rob, and Alistair sharing project insights and best practices to help your organization build and execute a successful content migration strategy to the cloud. Let's turn it over to Alistair for a short recap and kickoff.
Yeah, and so let's just recap. We know that we are able to move content from a legacy ECM system into SharePoint Online with a tool. It's perfect. We know that Microsoft 365 adheres to more than, I think it was 170 industry regulations and legislations from a compliance perspective. And we know that you can adopt a zero trust security framework when it comes to security. But yet we still have customers out there saying, well, it's going to cost too much. You know, we've got this big training skills gap that we're going to have to worry about when moving away because someone's been babysitting a legacy ECM system for the last 15 years, right? How do we go about making sure that organizations know and are happy with the fact that it's actually easier to move away from a legacy ECM system and start adopting a new technology? Jeff, I'm sure you had some stats on this as well. I mean, there were things that you were talking about from a training perspective and an adoption perspective and the amount of users and support people that you have for Microsoft.
I'm not going to lie, the more complex the migration, the better it is for a company like Xillio, but it doesn't have to be complex, right? So really, beyond the migration, looking to that long-term value. Migration to me is really that first step to maximize that cloud value. It really, what is it? It's really providing that scalable, resilient security and lower cost of ownership. That's really the start. It needs to be seen as a broader context, as a means to enabling the entire the IT environment to be run in a different way and unlocking for new business value. People will always say, well, what's the ROI? What's the ROI? And I get it. What's the ROI on your cell phone? Has anyone ever asked you that? It's hard to really put a number on that, right? It's invaluable. The way I look at a project like this, it's invaluable to put an actual number on it. So although I do like statistics and different data points, I couldn't find one. I will tell you though that, organizations are going to have to do it the way that we do business and thinking about that change management aspect to these and how day-to-day active management and optimization are going to drive value for the business. So these are things that I think about, but it really starts with the migration. There's really no room for delay, right? Every enterprise should be looking to accelerate that cloud adoption. And not to cry wolf, but really as a matter of urgency.
Yeah, but that's the thing, right? When I talk to customers and I say, well, have you moved to the cloud? Yeah, we've got a mailbox, we've got our identity, and we've got a mailbox, and we're using Office 365. What they're saying is they now downloaded Office 365, the desktop application, right? Word, PowerPoint, Excel, and Exchange and Outlook. And then they talk about, but yes, our compliance people are documenting people or Hummingbird people. I say, but so where's your cloud compliance people and your cloud security people? We've got those. So this is just an extension, right? It's not like you have to hire new people. Your security person for the rest of your environment, your modern workplace environment, your compliance people, it's an extension of, well, hey, we're going to put 300,000 documents into a document library, and now we can apply sensitivity labels and retention. You've already got compliance and security people inside of your organization. Also the upkeep, right? If you look at the percentage of niche players versus, and Gartner's always got these quadrants running around, and they talk about niche players, so you have to make sure that you have the right resource in the organization to support these legacy ECM systems. But when you look at Microsoft, I think the ratio was 1 to 17. For every one legacy ECM system support person, you've got 17 Microsoft people available, at least to give you that warm and fuzzy to know that I'm not the only, no, I started off as a COBOL developer, right? As a COBOL programmer. And generally, there's usually one COBOL developer, right, that's working in a financial institution who's been there for 25 years. And if he leaves, their world stops, right? And you want to mitigate the risk of being reliant on that. And by moving to Microsoft 365, you've got a plethora of skills at varying levels, and it's easier to get those people in. Also, upskill your existing team to worry about records management inside of Office 365. Worry about information protection inside of Office 365. You no longer have to, it's not I've got to study for 10 years and I've got to worry about these things. And I only can go to one training provider because they're the product provider as well. You could literally go and study online to be a SharePoint expert or a OneDrive expert, or pick a designation, pick a product inside of Microsoft 365. You can literally go to Microsoft Learn today, and I guarantee you in 3 to 6 months' time, you'll have enough skills to be able to maintain the security and compliance solutions that Microsoft provides you with today. So you no longer have to worry about, this is a niche technology, it's a niche product. There's 1,000 companies worldwide using it instead of the 500,000 companies that use Microsoft 365. So by being able to crowdsource the learning component of the technology, you can ramp up much faster. Rob, you spent some time talking to people about training, especially with Xillio tools, because we've got to train people to use the Xillio tools. Are you seeing customers having a similar experience where they are a bit worried about the cost of change?
Well, this is one aspect, obviously, but I think when you acknowledge that I'm going to move to that platform all in, and I'm going to utilize as much functionality as there's there to basically support my enterprise information management. If that is your goal, then you will find that the completeness of features, etc., together with a much less steeper learning curve than what you may be used to with your legacy or your silo-based infrastructure, is helping you a lot in adopting the new way of working a lot faster. But as with all transformation programs, you should, of course, utilize not just training, but for sure the soft factors like relying on very, very strong communications, gradually introducing the idea that the way of working is changing and should change, etc. At the same time, that working life will be a lot easier because of the power and the ease of use of the new tooling. So the training will teach people, obviously, on how to use them, but the aftercare may even be more important. Create your job aids, make sure there's a capable support team that can answer any questions, onboard new people quite easily, so they will become predictive in the shortest possible time frame. Those are also key success factors. And what I've seen in especially the big adoption programs is that the shorter you make the transition, the faster the adoption will work. If you do it half or you smear it across, I did 4-year migration projects. That's killing, man. Even if it's on a global scale, it's just too much because people will lose interest in the end, and they are forced to work with 2 or more systems for a long period of time at the same time, and it's never productive, obviously. So it's key that you do it fast, you do it well, you invest the right money into that. So if you talk about the cost perspective, you need a solid business case behind it anyhow. Because if you leave out the things that you think are least important, like the org change management, it will never be a success. So the cost factor should be directly related to what it brings in terms of the adoption as well, because only through the adoption, the full benefits will be reaped from that transformation in the first place.
So moving on to, I think this is our final one, information architecture, right? So when we talk about legacy ECM systems, that's where we started, right? Identify the document and content types, identify the metadata that's associated with it, being able to categorize and classify content based on identifying what it is, going through some sort of verification queue where we eyeball a physical piece of paper and we go, this looks like an invoice, right? And we've got 50 years worth of content. I mean, I was chatting to a good friend of mine, Simon Denton, and he was on one of our webinars talking about the amount of content that they have. And they're one of the few organizations in the world to actually request data trolleys or data boxes from Microsoft, 200 terabyte server that they literally ship, copy their content on, ship it into Azure because that's the amount of content they have. They have 100 years worth of content. And to rebuild your information architecture is always that. You've got an information architecture architect saying, well, we've built this universe on this legacy ECM system, right? It's got a categorization and classification schema. And we talked about lexicons and thesauri yesterday and all those big words that people like to throw around. How do we get past this problem, Jeff? Because I know you're very passionate about the new ways of working when we move into the M365 space, right? And we know that Microsoft has ushered in Project Cortex, and you've been very vocal about where this is going. Your opinions on how to overcome worrying about information architecture?
Let me just make sure, yes, I am off mute. None of us have done the on mute talking today. When I think of information architecture, I really think of I'm going to kind of turn this a little bit upside down and think about elements of a great employee experience. Because at the end of the day, this trickle-down effect to the employee is really going to be, why are we doing this to begin with, right? So Microsoft, at a number of the webinars that I've been attending, they sort of identified 6 elements of a great employee experience. Well-being, which we don't really talk about that much, but Microsoft has really been preaching that. Connection, having that, we're all working remote, we're going to be working remote in the future, but being connected to other employees. Obviously, I'm here in the United States, in Southern California. Rob is in the Netherlands, but I still feel very connected to Rob because we talk often, we collaborate quite a bit. Having that focus on what the key, what's our end goal, and having that purpose and being able to grow, and then empowerment so that folks like Rob, myself, or other colleagues are able to really get that fire in our belly. That's what gets us up every day. So I know I sort of twisted this a little bit, but really thinking about why are we doing this, and then what's the end goal?
Yeah, that part of the experiences component to Project Cortex and Viva, you've been very vocal about Viva and the topics experience and the insight side of Viva when you start looking at employee wellness and being able to measure the wellness of the organization based on how people are feeling in this Rona times that we're living in. It's very, very important, right? But coming back to what we were saying earlier on, how does Microsoft manage information architecture? Because in the old days, we remember the tag cloud from yesteryear, and we tag content with like a meta tag. And that's how we started driving search, the findability, right? A good friend of mine, Tracy van der Schyff, is able to, when she talks about search and how to find things, think about how you do a Google search, right? The second results page of Google is where all internet sites go to die, right? Because nobody clicks on the second page, right? Nobody does. But she's able to do a search for a Ducati Monster manual and come up with one result, right? So I don't know anyone outside of Agnes Molnar that spends all her life in search with the capability of doing that. So it's about the findability, but if we don't classify and categorize content correctly, you searching through, I've got one of 200,000 results, right? And with the advent of Project Cortex, and we're seeing, what is it called with, it's not topics, it's something else. I can't remember which Viva part this is, but this is SharePoint syntax. And being able to apply an AI model to this body of knowledge that you have, because everyone says it's going to take us a year to re-architect our information architecture because the product is new, and yet we still want to be able to identify, categorize, and classify and apply some sort of rights management and records management and information protection to the content. We've got 172 million documents that we want to move across to Microsoft 365. And what Microsoft has gone and said, well, let's give you some AI. Rob, you were talking about AI yesterday. You've obviously seen what Microsoft has done around entity relationships and entity extractors off a body of knowledge that you push in, and then being able to apply these models to classify and categorize content inside of your content store. You've all seen this specific demo that Microsoft does around document understanding. That's what I was looking for. And it actually detracts from having to worry about manual classification, right? You build out an entity model and you say, well, apply this entity model or this entity extraction process to a body of knowledge. And in so doing, you can use artificial intelligence and machine learning to actually categorize and classify the new way of working with content. So for me, when I look at information architecture standards, being able to circumvent someone eyeballing 172 million documents because they want to classify it, although you do bring across the metadata with that, it's just an easier way of being able to label content inside of your organization.
Yeah, so this is a classic one, obviously. And I must say that the recent developments, which we also see in this platform, are quite interesting because in all those years, in my beginning of my career as an information professional, I was very strict about information architecture. You had to classify everything. It needed to be precise. You had to use thesaurus to get the language disambiguation and all of those difficult things. Leading to an overhead that was practically unmanageable because you had to apply everything manually. There was no automation in that sense. And with the advance of AI, and there were earlier versions of AI, pretty crude, of course, getting it wrong all the time, so introducing less findability instead of increasing it. I think we're now at not saying that we're all there yet, because you still have to put effort into training models and stuff. But the intelligence, the algorithms have improved in such a way that burden actually has become a lot less of late, and it's quite recent actually, and it's still evolving. So yeah, I also played around like many people with the new features, obviously, and I'm quite surprised to see in what short time you can attain, of course, a still simple classification within a certain subdomain of the business. So if you distribute that burden across business, I think they now for the first time will get the tooling in hand, which allows them in a relatively short time frame to automate at least the classification and some entity extraction, which gives you the business context to your otherwise unstructured content, because that's still the root cause of this problem. Obviously, it's not structured data. The business context is not applied from the start. It has to be bolted on in hindsight or during the processing of that information. So I think we now got for the first time, the tooling that is understandable for a broad audience, for business people, business analysts at least, but all those are interested could easily learn this kind of technology to apply it and make their life a lot easier than that of their colleagues. So I'm quite pleased actually that this has been introduced. It still has to prove itself, I think, in larger organizations where at least the prerequisite is that on the highest level, and I always have the rule of thumb that you should be able to understand your organization's information model at least 3 layers deep. If you extend to 5 or 7, you're doing it wrong. So if you're able to apply the 3 layers using this technology, you will be able to classify that information in such a way that it should be relatively easy to retrieve and use in your operational processes.
And moving on, because we are burning daylight and we've got 5 minutes left to wrap up. The 6th myth, the cloud is slow. We're not even going to spend time talking about how fast the cloud is, because it's no longer a thing. 10 years ago, maybe the cloud was slow. Today, the cloud is not slow. we're actually delivering this webinar to you from the cloud. And there's no audio breakup, and you're seeing the video as well. So anyone that says the cloud is slow is wrong. So what do we need to do, gentlemen? What do we need to do? And before, we were talking about some lessons learned around lack of understanding, lack of knowledge, lack of being able to build out this new ways of working. But for me and Jeff, you were talking about this, and I've also picked this up from the model that Xillio uses from an engagement perspective when the customer says they're ready to go. And I've just made some notes here. So for me, coming back to what you were saying, Jeff, around planning, but before we can start getting into plans, we need to assess. You need to understand what you have. And working with customers currently around, they've got a open text content survey environment, and it comes with a bunch of modules, and they're using it for enterprise content management, not just for document management. They've got process management, which includes workflow and forms, right? So you need to assess, understand what you have, and then do a logical mapping to what the tooling is available to you in the modern workplace and security scenarios with Microsoft 365. Then from there, you can build out a proper plan to say, well, I've got 10 terabytes worth of content, and I'm using it for workflow forms. I've got a bit of records management. I might have some enterprise search. I'm using a thesaurus because I'm using managed metadata to tag my content. I've got a classification schema. And being able to map that back to what Microsoft 365 provides you from a platform perspective, and then going into planning. And once you get into the planning side, you can physically then say, I've got the tool, I now want to do my logical mapping. This content that's sitting in this content store, this folder structure inside of LiveLink or inside of Documentum is now going to go into this site collection or even this team inside of SharePoint. From there, naturally, you want to train the users up because eventually you're going to switch over and move on to the new platform. And once you've got all of those things bolted out, you're going to hit that migrate button, right? And because you've got that model built out, it's easy to say, I know what I have, I know the content types, and this is my content store, and this is my information architecture, and I've logically mapped that now to the new architecture, the new content type, the new way of working. I can hit that migrate button and then go make coffee, and hopefully the migration goes smoothly. But there are dashboarding and there's exception reports as part of the tooling when we actually do that. So gentlemen, Jeff, from your side, final thoughts on your top 5 tips for success when it comes to debunking the myths?
You know, Al, you touched on some great points today. The things that customers are really challenged, okay? And we touched on it before. Information overload, right? Reading and classifying those large sets of documents is super low volume and a super low value when it comes to employee time. Lost knowledge. Unclassified information is either lost or lacks required security and compliance. Finding the right information. We talked about search a second ago. Knowing where to search for what and which search results it's a major challenge in every organization. And then loss in productivity. Using multiple tools to drive context switching drains productivity and obviously creates frustration. So sort of overcoming those challenges and then relate it to your migration strategy and thinking about this from day one is really going to make a successful migration project. Thanks.
Rob, from your side, some closing thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, I think all in all, I do feel with those organizations, if they're not a startup that's fast growing and creates everything from scratch without having to do with legacy, it could be quite a challenge to think about what does this transformation mean for me, kind of acknowledging that it's a necessary thing to do. The good news is it's possible, it's doable, but also it has been proven to be worthwhile. It's the only thing is, don't think about it too much anymore. It's high time that you started to plan for it.
This wraps up part 2 of the session, 5 myths that block you from accelerating your digital workplace strategy. We hope you enjoyed the discussion and learned new insights that can help your organization build and execute a cloud-first strategy for your modern digital workplace. Thank you for listening today, and thank you for sharing the recording.